Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in, Casper here, and welcome back to some regular programming. Today we're talking about competitive TF2, specifically the latest update, which has fixed or made some proper adjustments to competitive TF2. The patch notes recently mentioned that they've added something called a Glicko 2 system. Now don't worry if you don't know what that means, because I do have another video coming which is going to explain all about how the matchmaking system works and what Glicko 2 is. But for this video, what we're going to talk about today is placement matches. In a proper matchmaking system, placement matches are the first set of matches that you play in order to place you in the appropriate rank as best as possible. So here is how my placement matches went and what I learned about TF2's revamped matchmaking system along the way. Things didn't start out perfect. My first match had script kiddies who not only had aimbots, but they could also instantly capture the objective. Needless to say, this first match was over pretty quickly. Match 2 also didn't go particularly well, and I think it's fair for me to say that because the match never actually started because someone abandoned during warm-up time. And if you're not familiar with this system, if someone abandons before the match actually starts, then the whole match is void and you go back to the lobby. Now they say the third time is a charm. Well, this time it kind of was, because here we had an actual match with real people actually trying on each team. One thing I noticed pretty quickly was the range of skill of my teammates. There was a couple of players who clearly had good mechanical skill, and they understood the basics of competitive TF2. Unfortunately, there was a couple of people who didn't. Let me show you what I mean. Capture points in Team Fortress 2 capture at different rates. I'm sure you've all noticed that having multiple people on a capture point at any given time increases the speed at which that point captures. But that's not the only mechanic which affects capture speed. Points on capture point maps cap faster the further towards the end of the map that they are. This applies for both symmetrical 5CP maps like Process and so on, and for the asymmetrical attack-defend maps like Egypt. A great resource for map-specific capture times, as it is for most things Team Fortress 2, is the Team Fortress 2 Wiki. Let's look at the stats for Gorge, the attack-defend version. We can see that the first point takes a whole 60 seconds to capture with just one person on it, as where the second point only takes 12 seconds. And the same is true for 5CP maps like Process, the map that my third match was on. The standard naming convention that people use for 5CP capture points is 1 to 5, starting from your own spawn. So 3 is always the middle point, 2 and 4 are the next points, and 1 and 5 are the last points on either side. Obviously these numbers are reversed depending on which side you're playing on, so my friendly capture point 1, the one closest to my spawn, is what the enemy would call capture point 5, the one furthest from their spawn, and so on. So with regards to capture rates, we can see that the middle point is the slowest at 22 seconds, with just one person standing on the point. The second and fourth are 14 seconds, and the first and fifth are just 4 seconds. Now the whole reason I bring this up is because this guy really didn't get it. He's recently spawned and he's running towards the midpoint, whilst the enemy is capturing our second. Not only does second capture faster than mid anyway, but they've also got multiple people on our second point. Now it is worth noting that there are situations where a middle point can capture faster than the second point. For example, if we had 3 or 4 people on mid, you can see here with the times, if they only have one person on second, we would still be able to capture mid faster than them. But that wasn't the case. I even tried telling him over voice chat, but he just didn't get it. Now I don't mean this in a disparaging way against the player. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I encourage players with less experience to get into competitive TF2. The problem here is that this guy's TF2 experience and the experience of other people on my team simply didn't align. It wasn't a balanced match. This is the sort of thing that a matchmaking system is meant to avoid. But of course, this was my first real placement match, so the system doesn't necessarily know my skill yet. So hopefully towards the end of my placement matches, this sort of thing will stop happening. Matches 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 all actually went pretty well, and they were the sort of gameplay experiences I would hope to get from a competitive matchmaking system. The teams on both sides seemed to know what they were doing, teammates were picking class compositions that complemented one another, and they were swapping when they were getting countered, and everyone was actually trying the objective. A couple of non-standard maps came up, Badwater and Turbine. Now there's a lot to be said about those particular maps being played in a 6 versus 6 format, and I'm not going to go into any of that here. However, I will say that these two particular matches I played on them were, for the most part, perfectly tolerable. At this point I am pretty happy with how things are going. I've only faced hackers twice and it was the same guys in the same afternoon, so you can sort of expect that. And I've only had 2 teammates abandon a game. Now one of these did happen after the game had started, so rather than cancel the match, the competitive matchmaking system will now actually add a bot to your team. Now unlike in other games such as CSGO, because TF2 is a respawn game mode, you never get the opportunity to control the bot, so the bot stays as an AI the entire time. Despite this particular match felt fairly even, and we did end up winning it. Unfortunately, there is always going to be levers in games like this, and to be perfectly honest, there's no perfect solution. And other than backfill, which has got a lot of its own problems, I think adding a bot is a pretty decent approach. One thing I have found quite disappointing up until now is the lack of communication. Sure, I've had mostly decent teammates who were playing the objective and they knew when to fall back and when to push forward, but there's been little to no callouts whatsoever, and to play in a competitive game at any level other than bad, callouts are pretty much necessary. My first set of matches were played on a Saturday afternoon, and I never waited more than 5 minutes. But many of my Sunday and weekday evening matches were taking the best part of half an hour to find a game, and that's simply not acceptable. And it sucks especially bad when someone abandons before the match starts, which ultimately means you've waited an hour to find a match, and that match will last 10 minutes at most. Now I do appreciate that the main reason for this is probably because the matchmaker is trying to make an evenly skilled match. In a low population game mode, it's always going to be a tug of war between making a good, evenly matched matchup and a quick to find match. The hope here is that this improves over time, and as more people pick up the game mode and more people get their assigned rank, the matchmaker will get more intelligent and more capable of creating balanced matches in a shorter amount of time. Now remember a moment ago how I said my experience on non-standard 6's maps wasn't that bad? Well, this is why a bigger sample size is required before we make any claims about that sort of thing. My next match on Turbine and 2 on Swiftwater and 1 on Attack Defend Gorge really drove home to me how these maps just aren't made for competitive, or certainly not 6 versus 6. On Turbine, sentry nests in the intel room are one thing, but when there's only 5 of you trying to attack the enemy sentry, because of course our own engineer is babysitting his sentry in our intel room, and of course when it's a group of random people of varying skill with no communication and coordination, capture the flag becomes super painful and unrewarding. Gorge, on the other hand, is not built with competitive in mind, and Swiftwater is a huge, specifically designed Highlander map. Highlander being the community competitive format, which is 9 versus 9, with 1 player of each class on each side. Now I'm going to use this opportunity to say I am confident that Valve-supported Highlander will never be added to the game. The game coordinator, the service that currently creates matches, can barely handle 6 versus 6 matches that are balanced at this point in time. So getting 18 people, all of a similar skill, and all who have chosen only one specific class to play, I just can't see that ever happening. That and the fact that the developers seem to want to create an open competitive format without things like class restrictions, so Highlander sort of wouldn't work without the class restrictions. After 16 matches, including the ones which never started, I'm nearly there. Just a couple more wins to get my rank. Match 17 starts and it's on a good competitive map. Granary. Unfortunately, it's a complete stomp. But is that really a surprise given these ranks? Literally my entire team is unranked, and the other team has an array of high-ranked players. How does this happen? Well, I think the honest and simple answer is that player population is just so low at this point in time that this is the best that the matchmaker could achieve. My best guess is that some of these guys are queued together, which is why it didn't split them across both teams. That, or the matchmaker just isn't very good. Either way, I worry about the longevity of this game mode if matches this seriously skewed continue to happen. So finally I achieved my rank, Executioner 2, which is rank 8 out of 13, 13 being the highest. Now I wouldn't claim to deserve any rank in particular. Ultimately, these systems only work if you trust them to work. That being said, I know that many of the games that I played getting up to this point would have gone differently if I didn't have a bot on my team, hackers on the enemy team, if my teammates were all familiar with the competitive format, and of course if all my matches were on competitive maps. Overall, I do think it was a good thing to finally play a decent, official, competitive game mode. I met quite a lot of subscribers along the way, so shout out to anyone I played with who recognised me and gave me a nice hello. Hello to you guys too. And I did meet a handful of people who communicated very well and they discussed strategies, etc. They clearly were the people that I was looking for. But unfortunately, those kind of people were too few and too far between. They were a very small percentage of the people that I played with. The foundations here are great, but the main thing we need is more people in the game mode. This will have two benefits. One, queue times will go down, and two, matches will be more balanced in terms of skill, simply because there's more people to pick from and a larger array of skilled players to choose from. So if you've ever wanted to try out competitive TF2, well, it's right here on your main menu. Give it a go. Let me know what you think. Hopefully the dev team keeps close tabs on the feedback this time around, and before you know it, TF2 will have a Valve-sponsored LAN. Well, it could happen.
Special. If that ain't fair, I don't know what is. Someone told me I'm precious.